Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Three Amigos podcast. Chris and Anthony here talking about the Ubisoft showcase, but more importantly, the game that closed the showcase, Star Wars Outlaws. The first open world Star Wars game ever, being done by Ubisoft, and they showed off a lot of gameplay. I think like 10 minutes or so. Maybe there was like a cutscene in there. But yeah, a lot of very exciting stuff. Almost a little surprised that it's an Ubisoft game because it looks good. But Ubisoft does make the occasional good game. And yeah, Anthony, so you most recently played Jedi Survivor, different
hmm
company, obviously, but another company that we didn't think was capable of distributing good single player games. I guess with your experience from that game, is there anything you were a big fan of in that game that you're hoping to maybe see sort of show up in this game? Obviously, different companies, so they're not really talking to each other when they're making the games, but just, what you might be looking forward to with this new game.
so I think in Jedi Survivor, the only location that returned from the movies was Coruscant, but you
Mm,
don't get a big portion of Coruscant. And I get that Coruscant is literally the size of a planet, but if they have certain locations from the movies that are coming back, because I don't know if this game is going to be like on one planet or a few planets you can travel to.
it
I do
looks like
know.
a decent chunk of planets.
I know it's between Empire and Return of the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to see more locations that get more scenery, you could explore more of it. And this does give me more of like a Han Solo vibe versus the other one being, a Jedi vibe. Um,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm not against it. My whole thing is like when The Mandalorian came out, I said to myself, why would I watch a show where the character isn't a Jedi with a lightsaber? And it took the first episode to say, yeah, this is cool. I'm gonna watch this. Um, so I did see a little bit of the gameplay, with the hover bike riding through the desert. That was pretty cool. And I did a solo thing on my channel about mentioning this game in the whole Xbox showcase thing, and my whole point of it was don't fuck it up. Just do right by it. And being that it's Ubisoft, there is the concern of being overwhelmed with all the side missions and collectibles and going to the towers to unlock the map and all that stuff. But if you can do a really good story and great gameplay and a really fun world to explore, then I'm all for it. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was one of my favorite ones with a nice world to explore. Watch Dogs had pretty interesting locations with Chicago, San Francisco, and then London. So they can make a nice world to explore. Just don't do typical Ubisoft, which we know they're gonna do anyway. Just poison it with side activities and quests and collectibles and all that stuff.
Ah, man, there's so much potential for them to like take a hint from the Jedi Fallen Order and Survivor games of like that was one of the few times where we saw EA like just let the developer make the game and not, micromanage and be like, "Oh no, make sure you put like gems so that we can like have a fucking microtransaction store." And like all that other like little bullshit that they would put in all their Madden and FIFA games and whatnot. And and it worked, like EA taking a step back and like letting Respawn make the game they want to make actually worked. They made two really great games. So I think seeing that, I'm kind of looking at the gameplay, which looked like, pretty good for like early footage. I mean, who knows? They say next year probably means 2025, to be honest. Like this looked like it's
Or
probably
the
gonna
fall
need
of
at
next
least
year.
yeah, like I mean, I was
Or
thinking like either this is the holiday game for next year
yeah,
if they don't have
Q4.
like an Assassin's Creed coming out, or this is 2025. Because like if it, I mean, they're saying this is open world. That's not an easy thing to do. Like, and you see it with like some of the Assassin's Creed games. Like those games are buggy as hell. So I think this kind of takes me into like one of the things I wanted to talk about in general, which is like I feel like when people hear open world, they get instantly excited about like a video game. Like, oh, it should be open world. Like people, we hear this about Pokemon all the time. We hear that basically Grand Theft Auto ruined this for like every other company out there. Is like, oh no, it has to be open world now. Imagine if it was open world. And it's like, yeah, but there's a lot of non-open world games that are also great. And maybe it's like like Jedi Survivor and Fallen Order had large open levels. They weren't like you couldn't just fly up into the sky and go to a different like go to whatever planet you wanted to, but like it felt pretty open. Like and it felt very focused.
Especially
Um
Survivor. Survivor is much more open. I mean, they do have one planet that's like their open world level, and then the other ones are kind of similar to the previous game, of like not as huge as that one planet, but it is
mhm.
somewhat open. Like Coruscant's mostly linear, and a couple of the other locations are mostly linear, but that one planet you go to is pretty much open world. But that's just one planet compared to the other ones. Um, and you're right, because you have all these bugs and issues and glitches that can happen, especially for Ubisoft. Even Jedi Survivor had some bugs and glitches. I know it was worse on PlayStation and PC.
Mhm.
My brother's save file crashed on PS5. He had to start all over. Um,
Jeez. Yeah,
but
so I mean based on the gameplay they showed, I thought it looked, pretty fun. Like what you mentioned about the bike in the desert. I thought that looked sick. Um, I think there's like, especially because there's combat. I think that's huge. If you're including these traversal elements to a game, and you're giving them more than just riding from point A to point B, and you're actually like might have to like fight people on the bike, or like they showed some sort of like Red Dead Redemption style, like Dead Eye, like freeze, like slowing down time or whatever, and like shooting out the engines on each of the other bikes that were following you. That was really cool. And then obviously having your own ship, so you assume there's going to be like ship upgrades, which is always fun in like space exploration games. And the ship combat looked pretty fun. And like all of a sudden, I guess you charge up and then jump to uh, hyperspace and go to a different galaxy.
so they're
Uh,
basically making Star Wars Starfield,
I
kind
mean,
of on a
I'd
smaller
rather play
scale.
the Star Wars version if I'm being honest.
I mean, so would I, because I don't see, I'm not hyped about Starfield. I don't really care about Starfield.
Yeah, but it looks like it's got a lot of potential. I think with Ubisoft games, it just kind of sucks that like a lot of us, and even like the comments I went through um from the full video they posted up, it was mostly people being like, please don't screw this up. Please don't screw this up. This looks really good. And I think a lot of people are really only saying that because Ubisoft has a bit of a track record of both infecting a lot of their games with microtransactions that sort of ruin the progression. Um, but the other thing is they put way too much shit into their open world games. Like there are so many collectibles, so many unlockable eagle eye points or whatever they had in Assassin's Creed, like where you're climbing up a tower and jumping off. Too much. Way too much shit. I remember Assassin's Creed Odyssey, one of my favorite games that I've ever played. There is way too much to do in that fucking game. There is way too much to do. I maybe made it like a third of the way through the total game, and it's fun, but it's way too much.
And I think Valhalla
Um,
had them even more.
dude, like I think it's one of the things that sometimes worries me about open world games is like I'd like to finish the game though. And like sometimes Ubisoft just puts so much stuff in their games that it's fun, but at the same time, like I don't know if I need a 200-hour Star Wars game. Like if there's gonna be a bunch of like cool stuff, and clearly they're telling some sort of story with two new characters. We saw the droid and we saw the human character in the game. I want to get through the story part. So I'm just hoping that it's a little bit more focus, which I think recently is just something that I haven't really seen from them in a lot of their games. And so hopefully we get that. But it's also just kind of cool to see a different company get to make a Star Wars game. I mean, it might not be the company we would have chosen because it's still kind of a shitty company, but it's a start, right? Like it is, it's
So
not EA. They're not in charge of this game. They have no say in what happens with this game. So this could be very interesting. Could be very
So who
interesting.
would you say is worse, EA or Ubisoft?
Oh man, that's really, really
Because
tough.
so here's what's funny because you mentioned earlier the microtransaction stuff, and in Jedi Survivor they have like there's different characters that would use they take different currency from you for different upgrades and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And so imagine if EA had a hand in it. It's like, oh, this character requires the Madden currency, and you have to put down, you
Oh,
have to buy the Madden currency to buy these
yeah,
upgrades.
man.
But
It's I don't oh man, I like cuz I want to be objective and like EA has put out some good single player games I really liked. I think they still do Need for Speed, right? EA still has the
yep,
Need for
EA
Speed
does. Yep.
license. And you know, the Jedi Survivor and Fallen Order games, those were good. So I want to give them credit where you can, where they don't screw everything up by like, you know, over micromanaging the developers that they hire to make these games. I think the only reason I would say Ubisoft is because I don't play the games that EA has like stuffed full of microtransactions. Like I don't play Madden, I don't play FIFA. Those are the big two. I play more Ubisoft games, and so I'm just more familiar with the shit that they do that I find really annoying. And like I never thought it would get to a point where I'm like complaining about a game being too long, but like it's just that a lot of their open world games just feel very unfocused. And Star Wars has a lot of shit going on in that universe. So if you're doing an open world Star Wars game, you already know people are going to be like, is Darth Vader in it? Like, where's Darth Vader? Where are the evil
Right.
guys that we're all familiar with? So I think now like you're already probably going to be answering questions about like who's in it, what cameos are we going to be getting? Um, and I just hope that there's like a focused story. It doesn't have to have a shit ton of cameos. Like in Fallen Order, what was it like? Just Darth Vader was like the only big cameo. Like wasn't everyone? I mean, like
Yeah, I
everyone
think
else
that
was like
was
like new characters.
yeah.
So I just hope that they kind of take some lessons from that game and just show like just because Star Wars has this like rich history of like iconic characters, you don't have to put all of them in the game. You can like build out your own story.
Yeah, because even with Survivor, I don't think there was any movie characters that returned that I can think of. If there was, I'm not gonna say anything for spoiler's sake, but other than that, I don't really think there was. I think it was more of like just building your own universe based on because Jedi Fallen Order took place when is it after New Hope or before New
Mm,
Hope?
man, I can't. I feel like all of them take place between episodes 3 and 4, but I really can't remember.
And so
I
with
feel like
this
every Star
one,
Wars spin-off happens between episodes 3 and 4, but I'm
my
probably
fear with
wrong.
this one is like because it is between 5 and 6, that's a huge um section for the Star Wars universe to where it's like, oh, during this game is when Luke already had his arm chopped off and the robot fixed it and he went back to Dagobah. So maybe he's training on Dagobah in this game and we don't see Luke, which is fine, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know what else they're planning to do, but I know that Ubisoft they're most likely gonna have some type of season pass where you can unlock different costumes and different XP boosts and all that other stuff.
Oh, for sure.
And my other problem with like, and it's not just Ubisoft and EA, it's everywhere now. All these games are releasing with either it's 60 either it's 30 frames or there's bugs and glitches and I'm like, what is the point of these powerful consoles if you can't develop the game to not have these bugs and glitches? And I understand what Phil Spencer tried to say with the open world aspect and the scale of it and it has to render and blah blah blah. But are these not powerful consoles to make these games look great? Because Jedi Survivor didn't have a lot of bugs in my game, but it still had a couple of issues here and there that were noticeable. And I'm like, I'm
Yeah.
paying $70 for this next gen game. Even Resident Evil 4 had some minor issues, like certain rooms you will walk through, and the lighting gets a bit weird and changes a little bit. And I'm like, this is weird. Like, what are you guys doing? So like I understand that no, games won't be perfect, flawless with no bugs or glitches, but I'm seeing more and more of it in recent games than previous games. And it's a bit of an issue, but with Ubisoft, they're gonna have some type of like controversy of, oh, the gameplay they showed was looking a lot better graphically than what we got at the release. And they had, all these bugs here, all these season pass microtransactions. And it's like, why do we still have that? Like, isn't that a dead thing or a dying thing now? The whole microtransaction thing, aside from Madden and FIFA and Fortnite, I
Oh,
guess.
man, microtransactions bring in a lot of extra money, man. A lot of extra money, but mostly for like live service games, like or games with like a live service component, like Call of Duty, Madden, MLB The Show, Fortnite, that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Bringing
which
a lot of money, so I would get it. I do think it's worth mentioning though, because when I was watching this gameplay, I was having heavy Watch Dogs 1 flashbacks of like when they showed off the game and everybody just like like everyone's nipples were blown off because they're like, this is the most amazing looking game we've ever seen. And then they showed like the updated gameplay a year later, and we were like, what happened here? You showed two totally different games. Um, in this gameplay, I was keeping like close eye on just like little things that would show you that this is very early footage. And a lot of times also the footage they present at these showcases is usually already outdated by the time we see it. So whatever we're seeing is an old build of the game, and they are already months ahead of whatever footage we're watching. So you can't always take it as if like this footage was literally put together yesterday. They just finished, playing the game and they shipped it off to the showcase. It's like, no, this footage is probably from 2 or 3 months ago. They've probably been working on the game since then. But I did notice that the character's hair, I guess the main protagonist, was like a little bit stiff. Like it looked like it just hadn't really been rendered yet. In a more realistic way that we would expect. And I actually appreciated that because to me it made it seem like, okay, the game is definitely not close to being ready yet. Like they're not putting together this like flawless, version of the game. They're showing you like early footage of what they hope the final version of the game eventually looks better and a lot more smooth and has more stuff in it. But I appreciate that kind of stuff. I like that they showed off several different components of what might make the game fun with the
right.
space combat and going to different galaxies, the bike that you ride on, the bike combat, the blaster combat looked like it had some interesting options. And I think it's just going to be fun to play as a hopefully this is the thing that I'm really praying they find a way to make it fun to play as somebody that doesn't have any powers,
Mm,
because
mm-hmm.
usually you get a lightsaber and you're slicing people up and you're force pushing them off of, really high up platforms and like cutting off stormtroopers' arms. And that's not going to be the game. To our knowledge, this is just somebody with a blaster. I mean, you might get other types of weapons, but you're not probably not going to be getting a lightsaber in this game. So it's going to be interesting to see, can they keep third person shooter combat interesting enough for however long this open world game is going to be.
Yeah, and I am hoping that they get those polishes because I know a while back we had a conversation about characters with hair in video games because I was complaining about WWE and how the hair was. And um that's a lot of characters to make the hair physics for, whereas like in a game like Batman, it's one cape that they need to make the physics for, and that's why they have like a flawless cape movement. And it's like that game, A Plague Tale, the first one at least. The hair physics for the character was so perfect. I purposely stood in one spot, moving around, trying to force the hair to go through her body like normal video games do, and it would not go through the body. I was like, this is amazing. They really got the hair it's like
Mm,
little things like that do matter to some of us. And with Ubisoft, it's like, can you guys really polish it up even better than what it is? Because like the Watch Dogs thing with the first one, here's what's funny about it. When I got the game at release, I didn't remember. I remember looking not as good as what they showed us, but I was like, it still looks good graphically and
mm-hmm.
visually. I played it again last year because when I bought I think I bought the season pass for the last Watch Dogs. It gave me the first one for free as a download, and I was like the
Oh
upgraded
yeah, yeah, yeah,
remastered. It
yeah.
looked terrible. I was like, this is what it looked like back then because I don't remember it looking this bad, and it looked bad. So it's like that. I don't know if you want to call it like beer goggles or whatever it is for the games, where it's like you thought it looked good, but when you go
Yeah,
back
the
to it, you're
rose-colored
like,
glasses. That's like how people like they'll see like Redfall and they'll be like, "This looks like a PS2 game," and it's like, "Hey man, why don't you go back to PS2 real quick and go look at what some of
mm-hmm,
those games actually looked like before you go saying that everything looks like a PS2 game?"
yep.
It's like most of those PS2 games look fucking awful. Like legitimately just like sharp ass lines. There were you couldn't do a fucking person's face without it looking like a trapezoid. Like
I mean, look at GTA like 3 and
yeah, like well that's the other thing too, like with a game like this, I personally, I don't, I'm sure other people feel differently. I'm a little more lenient with graphics when it's an open world game, just because I know it's really hard to like you have draw distances, you're trying to render like thousands of things at once because you can't just set the player on like a straight path or even like kind of just I guess a slightly more narrow path, kind of like a Last of Us or a the Star Wars Jedi games. It's just like you have freedom around a level, but you're in that level. You're not like just hopping in your spaceship and immediately flying through space to another planet and then landing and then starting over, kind of like No Man's Sky.
hmm
So I'm a little more lenient with graphics with these games than just, back in the day with GTA, like we're used to open world games kind of looking like shit. So if it doesn't look like shit, I'm like, all right, we're off to a good start. We're off to a
So
good
I'm only
start.
lenient with those games in terms of like the scale of what the Star Wars game is, and similar to like how No Man's Sky and Starfield is. If it's like multiple massive areas to travel between, then I'm like, okay, I understand why something may not look that good. But if it's just a standard open world that takes place in like one map and it doesn't look that great, then I'm not too
Yeah.
lenient on that because I'm like, look at Horizon Forbidden West. And I don't know if it comes down to whether one developer is more skilled than the other or they have more resources than the other. But Horizon Forbidden West is one of the biggest maps I've seen. And I have so many screenshots that you think was from a cutscene and it's complete gameplay with no editing
Mm,
of filters or anything. And I'm like, if they can do this visually, other companies should be able to do it. And I do think when a company says we need more time to make this game, they should get the time to do it. I understand you don't want to wait longer than you already been waiting, but it's better to get it better, to give it the time it needs rather than get it early and it's shitty. You don't want to eat something undercooked and then get sick. You want to eat something that's properly cooked. Um, and
yeah.
hopefully
Uh,
they can actually deliver on the scale and the performance. That's more important for me though, is the performance as well. Is it going to run great and not have
yeah.
terrible frame rate?
Yeah, I couldn't tell. I mean, you can never tell based on like these pre-rendered like showcase demos. It looked like it was running at a pretty smooth frame rate. I don't, maybe they went into more of it on a blog post. I don't know if they've gone over any of the specs yet of like, 1440, 60 FPS or 4K
Mm.
30 or any of that stuff. Ubisoft has the money to do 4K 60. This is not a small company. And it's a huge IP. So if ever you were going to pump money into making sure something is absolutely perfect, it should be a Star Wars open world game because that could be massive for Ubisoft, a company that has literally been trying to find their next big hit because they beat the shit out of the Assassin's Creed series. Like this would be the one to go all in on.
Yeah.
But I did want to say also just a kind of an off thing about Horizon, why that game looks so good is like I remember I was watching like a behind the scenes thing on the first game and they were talking about like how they'd gotten all these compliments about the graphics, and it was like they had developed. So it really does, I think, come down to the developer unless they're using Unreal Engine 5. But it was like they had developed a system where the game was only ever loading what you were looking at. So from a behind the scenes standpoint, if you pulled back and you had like a full 360 view of that game
hmm
beyond what your character was looking at, like beyond what Aloy was just where the camera was pointed, there was nothing around you. and it was like they were only ever loading in what was directly in front of you, which is how they were able to make everything in front of you look so good all the time.
That's what Spider-Man did too.
Yeah, and I remember seeing that and I was like, God, that sounds complicated. I can't even begin to understand, first of all, how you even come up with that idea, but also like how you make it work. Because surely you have to play test to make sure if somebody spins the fucking camera around really, really fast, that they don't just see darkness.
Right.
Like a quick shot of just darkness behind them.
Especially because in Spider-Man, there's a glitch that you can do, or I guess it got patched away. But if you do a wall run and you like slow down the time with like a aim or whatever while you're doing like the side hop thing, there's like a trick, and he would just like slingshot across the screen really fast, and the game would still just run with it and load. And I'm like, bro, they had to get this thing to load quickly to where if something like that happens, then it won't screw up the game. And I wonder if that should be the norm for these massive open world games. Because you look at a game like, I hate to bring up Starfield every time because I don't really care about it, but I'm watching the gameplay of that and I was like, this is very choppy. People are not noticing how choppy it kind of is. And then Phil
Yeah.
Spencer had that interview about, oh, it's not about the console that we made it 30 frames. It's a developer choice because of what we're trying to load and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, bro, shut up. Like,
Called it a creative choice. Dude,
yeah,
that is
like
so stupid. What a
they
dumb. Just
owe
stop letting Phil Spencer do these interviews.
Bethesda needs more resources that is owed to them by Xbox because
Bro, they
like
got like $9 billion, man. Fucking make it work. Like what?
they spent it on that watch that you can buy. Where's the
Yeah,
16 times the detail, Todd?
dude, the
Like,
problem with I mean, this is like a separate podcast, but the problem with 30 FPS is that if there are frame drops at 30 FPS, then the game really does look like shit. Because like if like I hate to beat a dead horse, but like Gotham Knights went through so many frame drops and so many people's gameplays, and the same with like Pokemon or whatever, any 30 FPS game that is like trying to do a lot at once. If you have a frame drop and all of a sudden you're down to like 24, 20 FPS, the game is a total disaster. Cyberpunk went through that same shit of like barely being able to hold 30. And if you're aiming 60 and you drop to 50, not as noticeable as going from 30 FPS to 20 FPS, where you're
yeah.
basically playing a fucking slideshow at that point. Like, it's just not going to look very good.
Because like I was playing Street Fighter Online and it wasn't I don't think it was more of a frame rate issue that happened. I think it was just a lag because the guy had I guess he had terrible connection. But it was so bad that I couldn't even fight the guy and I lost. And I'm like, I tried to send him a message, but I guess he's on private. I was like, bro, fix your internet because your internet sucks. But like other games, like, when they have a lower frame rate and it starts to bug out and get slow, and you're like, I paid 70 for this. Like they say it
Yeah.
costs more to make games, and yet you're not delivering on these great things. And with Ubisoft, um, I think Ubisoft is ambitious in the sense of they work on so many projects at the same time. I don't know how that works in terms of like our company is so big that this department works on this game and then this department works on that game. I don't know how that is done. I
Well,
don't know.
Ubisoft is they like the overall name Ubisoft, that's just the publisher now, and they've bought up a lot of smaller companies, and either renamed them completely or they let them keep their name and they just put them on different games and stuff. So
Right.
I know like the dev team that makes The Crew is Ivory Tower, which I believe they've just kept the name. They haven't actually made them like Ubisoft and then input name of the city that they are like
All
residing
right.
in, like
Because they
Ubisoft
have like,
Montreal or
yeah,
whatever.
Montreal.
Um, so to my knowledge, that's how it works right now.
So we
Um,
need the one that's like Ubisoft, we own you
Pretty much.
company.
I mean, it's pretty much what EA does is like
Yeah.
they buy you and then you make their games and then they distribute them or they publish them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think this game has a lot of potential. There was one more thing that we did not talk about. They showed off dialogue choices, where your character is deciding whether or not to bribe somebody from the Empire or take the money that you were promised from the mission you just ran. That could be interesting. I kind of think like dialogue choices, it really depends how they're implemented. I know that sometimes, although I guess a good example of this is probably Assassin's Creed Odyssey, where a lot of the choices you made in that game did actually matter later on in
Right.
the universe that game took place in, which was actually pretty cool. So But then there are other examples of games where, like one of my favorite games, Mass Effect, where your choices mattered up until the third game when they just decided they had an ending in mind, and nothing you said or did the entire game actually mattered. So it could be cool. I mean, similar like we saw this in Guardians of the Galaxy, like briefly. There's like a couple of instances where you have to decide between two things, and I'm not
Right.
too certain how much it influences. I mean, obviously, like the ending is already determined, so it's not like you're going to get a different ending. But I'm curious to see how they implement that and how much
Right.
of the gameplay it actually impacts. Like, for example, you in the example they showed, the character decides not to bribe the person, and when they leave, the person from the Empire puts a bounty on their head, and that's why they're like running out, hopping in the ship, jumping to a different galaxy. So I was immediately wondering, and like they didn't show it. It's not like they like rewind and they go, okay, here's what happens if you bribe them.
Right.
Like, so I was a little bit curious of like, okay, is this going to happen either way? Like, if you bribe them, they're going to be like, you can't pay me off. Like, get them. Everybody try to kill that person. Like, either
Right.
way, it's going to end up in like a gunfight. Or is this actually a mission that's only happening because you chose not to do something? And if you'd done the other thing, it would have been a different mission or a, different type of thing might have happened.
That was
So
my
that could be
problem with
interesting.
that was my problem with Hogwarts Legacy because they give you choices of what you say, and it's typically down to two choices, one positive, one negative. And
Yeah.
my whole plan was I'm a Slytherin who wants to be a Dark Lord. I'm going to do negative, you know, responses. But number one, the negative responses didn't feel negative enough to where I was like, I'm not even being evil right now. I'm just saying something that's like a difference of opinion, and he's being kind about it. But I'm like, I'm trying to get that whole like, oh, you're a filthy mudblood and
Hmm.
this and that. And I feel like those dialogues didn't change, or I don't know if it changed anything or if it really mattered to me. But a game like,
Mm.
Mass Effect, it changes some things. I played
Yeah.
Dragon Age Inquisition and I was actually a bit of a ruthless king in some parts. Because you can like execute different people based on like whatever reasoning or whatever. Like I think this guy tried to break through the castle walls by launching, I think, chickens or pigs at your castle or something like that. And so I think I decapitated him for that, I think.
Jesus, man, you're a bit of a dick in these games, and they let
I
you be an
think so.
asshole. I remember Red Dead Redemption 2 also.
Yeah, because even that, like if you're a dick, they're gonna send the law after you and everything. So if it does
Um,
make changes, I would like to see that happen because um with Assassin's Creed it did make some changes. Infamous is of course infamous for doing that.
I mean, yeah, that was one of the OGs of
So if it does make
yeah.
changes to the game, then yes, I want to see both sides of it. But my counter to that, with me personally, I don't have the time to play through one style entirely and then go back and play through it the other
No,
way. I
yeah.
don't have the time for that.
I almost never play games twice. I mean, I made a lot of
Yeah,
choices in Guardians of the Galaxy, and I loved that game to death, but I'm not playing through that whole fucking game again
yeah. That's why I
just to
haven't
make
bought
the
it because
opposite
like I
choice.
don't want to go through it again because we're in our
Yeah.
30s, we have jobs and other things we have to accomplish in our
Yeah.
lives. We ain't got
Yeah.
time to, do that. We don't get summer vacation.
No, but I think like I'm always curious, like if those things need to be in the game or if they're just like throwing it in because they're like, here's a fun mechanic that we've seen other games do, or like, oh, we did this in Assassin's Creed, let's toss it in here. To me, it's like if you're gonna put that in the game, at least make it matter. Like, don't just put it
Right.
in just to make us feel like the illusion of choice, but everything plays out the same regardless.
Because I think that's what it is. They want you to feel like you're creating your own adventure. And for me, when I did Hogwarts Legacy, which I still have to go back to, but for me, I was like, yeah, you're not making me feel much of a dark wizard, so that's okay. I'm not, I don't want to keep going with that. And then with the other games like like Infamous and Dragon Age, you can be an asshole and it'll make you an asshole. So for
Mm.
this one, I don't know, is your character part of the Rebel Alliance or just like a regular random person? Because if it's like a
I think
random
just a
person,
regular random kind of like mercenary type thing.
okay, so like
That's
I
the
want
vibe I got.
to.
I haven't read any of the blog posts. I don't know that much about the like the details of the game yet, but yeah.
Because like I want a game where it's like if you're gonna give me a world that's between like within the original Star Wars trilogy, and I have choices that would determine how my outcome is, I want to. have the outcome where I could either join the Rebel Alliance or become part of the Empire. Like that would be kind of cool. Um, but other than that, at least make major changes to the world. With the whole bounty thing, is it going to be one of those where you have a bounty on that planet, but you can just pay off the bounty and go back and you're all good? Like,
Kind of like Red Dead, yeah.
yeah, because I think Assassin's Creed Odyssey did the same thing as well. And then the other thing that
Yeah.
what they did though was they send bounty hunters out there that you can find and fight them, and I'm sure they'll do the same thing because it's still
That was
Ubisoft
pretty
and
cool. I remember that. Like you check the map and there'd just be like a couple of bounty hunters coming to get you.
and
I
you get
did
those
like
who are
that. I
strong
did
and they'll
like
kick
that in
your
the game.
ass. I had one where I was like on the roof of
Yeah,
a
some of them
building.
actually killed me.
Like I was hiding on the roof just trying to snipe him out with the arrow, and I just kept dying. I was like, I'm leaving. And there was one where he had a lion with him, and I was like, I gotta fight you and the lion?
Yeah.
Come on.
Some of those motherfuckers were brutal, man. They
So
were
you gotta
brutal.
give us a bounty hunter with like a a droid or something, because Jedi Survivor had bounty hunters, but I don't think it's like they go after you for things you do. I think it's like either random or it's like set based on certain locations and things that would
Hmm.
happen in the game. But you can fight bounty hunters and use their currency to do some other thing. I forgot what you get for it, but there is a rumor of a character in that game. I don't know if it's true because I haven't done it, but I'm not gonna say anything else. So this game, we don't need any major cameos. I mean, it'd be nice to have a couple, but we don't need anything major. Just focus on your own story, get your universe out there, create the world you want to build, and just make it a fun game. Make it worth the $70.
Yeah, and it is cool too. Like I remember, I forget how many years ago, but some company was working on like a Star Wars bounty hunter game. I think it was called Star Wars 1313. That eventually got canceled, and they had showed like early gameplay and it looked promising. But then they just canned it. And it's just cool that we're getting some diversity in the Star Wars gaming
Was
world.
that the
It's,
Boba Fett game?
huh?
Was that supposed to be the Boba Fett game?
I think so.
Because I know they did the crappy Jango Fett one, and
Oh no, no, this was one that was supposed to
there's
come
another
out
one,
maybe
yeah.
like, yeah,
So that one got
10
canceled.
years
And I
ago.
think it was Boba Fett. And I remember they did the Jango Fett one that sucked. They did and that's the thing about
Yeah.
Star Wars games. They're not all great. Like,
No, most of them are
um,
not good.
Jedi, what is it? Outcast or whatever. It's like two of the
Yeah.
recently put them on Switch. Those were terrible. The pod racing one was terrible. I think it was terrible. I don't know, it's pod racing. I don't really care about pod racing. Um, the Lego Star Wars was, So, I mean, it looks
Uh,
like we're on the right path.
Yeah, I will say too, like, Assassin's Creed, for better or for worse, I know it can be a little bit of a divisive series. There are a lot of really cool mechanics in those Assassin's Creed games, and I think if you want to borrow some of them, they could fit really well in a Star Wars game. So, to an extent, it makes a lot of sense why Ubisoft might want to try their hand at an open world version of Star Wars. It looks promising right now. I think the only bummer is that we're probably not going to hear much about this game until like next May, because they have to promote the Crew 3, two new Assassin's Creed games, plus the VR game. It's going to be a while before we hear anything about this game again. But when we do, we will hit you guys up. Three Amigos Podcast. We're out.